Hello and welcome to a new vlog and video, and today we are taking a look at my short cruise with the MSC Virtuosa that I've showed you in my last video. Here on the map you can see our route. We are going from Rotterdam to Southampton and then on to Le Havre in France, but we are starting at a different ship, at the SS Rotterdam in Rotterdam. This is a former ocean liner which is now a hotel ship and also a museum and event location. And of course I'm going to stay there overnight before my cruise. This is the perfect place to stay when you're starting a cruise in Rotterdam, because I mean, what's better than staying on a ship when you're going on a ship? And as you can see, they have fantastic cabins. They are much bigger than on newer ships. At least if you book a superior cabin. Other cabins are also spacious, but they don't come with the portholes. They are inside cabins. So I would recommend taking a superior cabin. As you can see, it is a fantastic cabin. I then went to the pool deck of the SS Rotterdam to take a look at yet another cruise ship of MSC. It's the MSC Virtuosa, which is leaving the port of Rotterdam a day before my cruise. Much smaller ship than the Virtuosa, of course, which we're also gonna see going into the port later on in the video, as she was on her sea trials after being at the shipyard here in Rotterdam. Here we can see the skyline of Rotterdam and the beautiful pool deck of the SS Rotterdam. Of course, the SS Rotterdam also has a fantastic restaurant on board. They even have two restaurants on board. Today I was in the Lido restaurant, which is the casual restaurant. They also have a fine dining restaurant on site as well. Late in the evening I left the ship again, because now it was time to see my cruise ship, the MSC Virtuosa, going into the port of Rotterdam. Was tracking her on marina traffic and I saw that she was already pretty close, so I left the ship and here we can see her approaching the port of Rotterdam. It's quite a beautiful sight to see your cruise ship going into the port, so of course I stayed awake until she arrived. And originally it was planned that I board the ship in Hamburg, but unfortunately the cruise was changed due to her time in the shipyard here in Rotterdam, and the call in Hamburg was cancelled. The cruise was shortened and instead it started now in Rotterdam. But I decided to do the cruise anyway, because the MSC Virtuosa is quite rarely seen on the German market. It was supposed to be her only cruise from Hamburg, and usually she's sailing from Southampton, so that's why I still wanted to do this cruise. On the next morning it was time to leave my wonderful cabin here on the SS Rotterdam. After breakfast I left the ship and I just casually walked over to the cruise terminal. That's just a walk of around 20 to 30 minutes. Of course you could also take a taxi, but I had a lot of time, so I decided to walk, even though the weather was pretty bad and was raining pretty heavily. But still, it was nice to walk alongside the harbor, see some other ships, also some old river cruise ships that were docked here. And just around half an hour later I was at the cruise terminal, but I decided to walk past it and walk to the Erasmus Bridge first, and that's also my recommendation when you're going on a cruise from Rotterdam or your ship is docked in Rotterdam. There is a fantastic photo opportunity on the Erasmus Bridge. In my case it was also the only possibility to take nice pictures of the MSC Virtuosa, because in Southampton, depending on the docking location, it's quite difficult to take pictures, and in Le Havre it's also nearly impossible. Here in Rotterdam it's quite easily possible, especially because the ship hadn't turned around yet, so it was quite easy to take some nice pictures of my MSC Virtuosa. And I'm heading to the terminal, and check-in was not going perfectly fine. It took quite a while. There were huge queues. Already outside of the terminal were huge queues, and continued inside there were also huge queues. That was mainly caused by the ETA, the Electronic Travel Authorization of the United Kingdom, because a lot of passengers didn't know that they have to have the ETA, and therefore there were a lot of passengers in line who were denied boarding, had to apply for it first, and that took quite a while. But eventually I got on board, and here you can see my rather small cabin. I went for a cheap cabin category, This is one of the smallest cabins on board, also indicated on the deck plan, and you can also see there that the bed is only 1 meter and 40 centimeters wide, which is smaller than usual. You can see that on the deck plan, so I knew it and it was no problem for me. As I was on my own on this cruise, that was actually no problem at all. If you're traveling with two, it might be a bit small. The only problem of this cabin is that if you go into your cabin and you want to go, for example, to the desk or to the wardrobe, you have to go past the bed, and there is just such a small space between the bed and the wall that you actually have to walk sideways to walk past it. So that's a bit too small in my opinion, but otherwise it's a nice cabin. Here you can see Zoe, the smart speaker that obviously I haven't used because I'm not sure what I should use it for. You have a minibar, and on board of an MSC ship it's also a filled minibar, but that also means that it will get locked on the last evening. There is a desk which unfortunately doesn't come with a proper chair, but with this small chair which we saw just a second ago, we of course have power sockets, we have nightstands, the bed is also quite comfortable, so in general the cabin is pretty nice, just it's quite small. But let me mention again, I booked this cabin on purpose. It was one of the cheapest and smallest cabins on board. Here we can see the bathroom, which is a standard bathroom, which is nicely equipped with a good layout. Quite nice bathroom. And then it was time for the mandatory safety drill, which takes place in your cabin. All passengers have to be in the cabin at a certain time. Then we are all watching the safety video at the same time, and then there will be some announcements.
Please follow the instructions that we will show you shortly in the safety video. Meine Damen und Herren, das Signal, das Sie gerade gehört haben, ist das allgemeine Notsignal.
After those explanations, you have to go to your muster station, check in with your cruise card, and that's it. So it's working quite well, quite a simple procedure, also working well with more than 6,000 passengers. And it's also a quite good drill for the crew, because in this case actually all passengers are going to the muster stations at the same time, and you can clearly see that it works quite well. Later in the evening we left Rotterdam, and of course I went to the sun deck, because leaving Rotterdam is very spectacular. It's one of the most beautiful ports in Europe. Sailing in and out of Rotterdam is always spectacular and you should never miss it. Here we are going past the SS Rotterdam, where I stayed the night before the cruise. You can see that she's clearly a lot smaller than my MSC Virtuosa. Of course, ships were much smaller back then, but as you can see, it is a very, very beautiful ship, and once again I can highly recommend staying on this ship when you're starting your cruise in Rotterdam. It is one of only a handful of ocean liners still existing nowadays. Here we can see the beautiful skyline of Rotterdam once again, and that's the reason why it is so beautiful to go out of Rotterdam. Of course, it's also quite interesting to see the port of Rotterdam, but that takes a few hours until the ship reaches the open seas, so I didn't watch the full sail away, but at least I wanted to see the part where we are leaving the city center of Rotterdam, as the docking location for cruise ships is very centrally located. I then went into the theater for a show. It was a singer, nothing spectacular but quite nice, and then it was time for a show in the Galleria Virtuosa. Always after the shows in the theater there's a show in the Galleria Virtuosa using the big LED screen, which is also very spectacular. After that I went into the Starship Club to try Rob the Robot. There you can make your own drink, you can decide what you want to have inside your drink and how much, and then the robot will mix the drink for you. We will see that in a second. Of course, it's not quite cheap. It's of course mainly for entertainment, was £14, but at least you're allowed to keep the cup in which the drink is served. And here we can see Rob in action. It's quite funny. You have to sign digitally, of course, that you do not ask for a refund if your own creation doesn't taste very well, because of course you can mix all things they have together, So apparently a few passengers tried to get the refund because their own Croatian didn't taste very well. Of course, you're not gonna get that. But my creation was very nice, and then it was time for dinner, and you can clearly see that this is an MSC cruise ship. It looks like MSC food. As always, it's usually quite nice. Of course, not fine dining, and of course it's not decorated very well, looking a bit more simple, but the taste is usually quite nice. I would always be a bit careful with food which only tastes when it's done perfectly, like a steak. That's sometimes not working very well, but otherwise the food is quite okay on board. Just remember, MSC is the cheapest cruise operator on the market. This cruise was offered for less than 50 euros per night in the cheapest inside cabin. So of course you cannot expect fine dining on board. So the food is okay for the price you pay for the cruise. The next morning after breakfast it was time for the immigration control, which is mandatory for all passengers on board when the ship is reaching the United Kingdom. Therefore there were quite some long queues, took around 30 to 45 minutes, and as usually there were a few passengers complaining about that, but everybody who's done a cruise before knows that this is mandatory and not a fault of the cruise company, so of course it was not a big problem for me. And once immigration was done, I left the ship, made some train videos for you, and then I visited the shopping center, had some nice lunch at the Nando's, and then I walked back to the MSC Virtuosa and headed back on board. Of course, I didn't want to spend too long ashore as I was just on board for a short cruise. This is already my last evening, so of course I also wanted to use the amenities on board. For example, I went into the gym, which is very nice as mentioned in my ship tour. Not the biggest gym, but it comes with very nice equipment as you can see here. And after that there was a very beautiful sunset here in Southampton. That was a magical moment. And after this beautiful sunset, I went again into the theater. I made another reservation for a show. This time it was an artistic show. It was a juggler, but it was not just a juggler, it was also a comedian, so it was a quite funny show. Very nice. Of course, you have now seen just two solo artists on stage, but this was the beginning of a transatlantic cruise heading to the Caribbean, so therefore I think they are starting with smaller shows, and then when the ship is at sea for several days, they're probably gonna have some bigger shows. After the show in the theater, there was another very impressive show in the Galleria Virtuosa, so don't miss that. It's always very impressive to see a show on that huge screen. It's always after the show in the theater, and in my case then after that there was like half an hour for a drink, and then it was time for dinner. And I went again to the Starship Club, but this time I didn't get a drink from Rob, but from the crew, because there you can also order some special cocktails. As you can see here, I got a nice smoked cocktail, and then it was time for dinner. Of course, once again, it's not looking like fine dining, but the taste was nice, so always remember, cruises with MSC are much cheaper than with any other company, so therefore don't expect too much of the food, but for the price you pay it is actually quite good. And after a nice drink in the Sky Lounge, it was time to go to sleep, and on the next morning it was already time to say goodbye to my cabin, and then I went to breakfast, and after breakfast it was time to leave the ship here in Le Havre in France, and from here we will continue in one of the next videos, but in between we have the train videos from the United Kingdom. Those will be the next videos coming up. And here we have left the ship. We can see her. Quite an impressive ship, very big of course. Disembarkation worked very well and easy, and I just simply walked to my hotel in Le Havre. It takes around 30 minutes to walk to the station from the cruise terminal. And also from here we will see some train videos, but first we will see the videos from the United Kingdom. And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Here you can see when the next video will be uploaded and the name of the song. As always, I'd like to say thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to comment, like, subscribe or share the video link, and I hope to see you in my next video then.